Room 237. Mark Hollister's shoulders sagged with relief as he finally wheeled his battered suitcase through the hotel's revolving door. The trip from the airport had been a nightmare, gridlocked traffic, a cabbie more interested in his phone than the road, and a light drizzle that soaked through his jacket. All he wanted now was a hot shower and a soft bed. The lobby of the Pinewood Hotel wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it would do for a night. Faded floral wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the crystal chandeliers overhead looked like they hadn't seen a duster since the Reagan administration. A musty smell hung in the air, reminiscent of old books and mothballs. As Mark glanced around, he noticed a slight flicker in one of the chandeliers, a tiny sign that all wasn't quite right, though he quickly dismissed it. "Welcome to the Pinewood Hotel," chirped the receptionist, a woman who looked to be in her mid-50s. Her bottle blonde hair was teased into a style that screamed 1980s, and her name tag read Doris. "Checking in, hon?" Mark nodded, fishing out his wallet from his back pocket. "Yeah, reservation for Hollister." Doris's acrylic nails, painted a shade of pink that matched her lipstick, clacked against the keyboard as she searched for his booking. The sound grated on Mark's already frayed nerves. There was something slightly off about her smile. It was too fixed, too practiced, as if her face had grown accustomed to holding the expression longer than it should. Here we are," Doris said after what felt like an eternity. "One night, room 237. Business or pleasure, Mr. Hollister?" "Business," Mark replied, stifling a yawn. "Just a quick stopover before my flight tomorrow. Got a big presentation in Chicago." "Well, I hope you find everything to your liking," Doris said, sliding a key card across the counter. "Elevators are to your right. Breakfast is served from 6 to 9 in the morning, and checkout is at 11. Enjoy your stay." Mark mumbled his thanks and headed for the elevator, his suitcase's wheels squeaking on the polished floor. As the door slid shut, he caught a glimpse of Doris watching him, her coral lipsticked smile never wavering. Something about that smile made him uneasy, like she knew something he didn't. He chalked it up to exhaustion. The elevator creaked and groaned its way up to the second floor, the aged mechanism protesting every inch of the journey. Mark's eyes caught the flicker of the floor indicator, which stuttered between numbers as if the elevator itself were uncertain of where it was. When it finally shuddered to a stop with a ding that sounded more like a wheeze, Mark stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. The carpet, a garish pattern of red and gold swirls, seemed to shift under his feet as he walked. He blinked hard, reminding himself to book an eye appointment when he got back home. Room 237 was at the far end of the corridor. Mark swiped his key card, pushed open the door, and flicked on the light switch. The room was small but clean, with a queen-sized bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom. A generic landscape print hung on one wall, and heavy curtains framed a window that looked out onto the parking lot. The decor was neutral, almost forgettable, except for a small dark stain on the carpet near the bed. It seemed to pull slightly under the dim light, but Mark, desperate for rest, quickly looked away. Mark set his suitcase on the luggage rack and unzipped it, pulling out his toiletries and tomorrow's clothes. He hung up his suit to prevent wrinkles and placed his dress shoes by the door. After a moment's hesitation, he also took out the flash drive containing his presentation and set it on the nightstand. Can't be too careful, he thought. A quick shower helped wash away some of the day's stress. The water pressure was decent, and the complimentary soap had a pleasant, if generic, scent. As Mark toweled off, he caught sight of himself in the steamy mirror. Dark circles under his eyes testified to too many late nights at the office. This business trip couldn't end soon enough. The mirror seemed to mist over faster than usual, the condensation spreading in odd patterns, almost like letters forming. Mark wiped it away hastily, refusing to let his mind wander. Dressed in a comfortable t-shirt and boxers, Mark settled into bed. He set his phone alarm for 6 a.m., wanting to leave plenty of time for the morning rush hour traffic. His flight was at 9, and he didn't want a repeat of today's stress. Sleep came quickly, but it was far from restful. Mark tossed and turned, plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. In one, he was wandering endless hotel corridors, opening door after door, each room identical to the last. In another, he was trapped in an elevator that kept descending, floor numbers ticking by long after they should have reached the ground level. The carpet from the hallway featured prominently, its swirls seeming to come alive and wrap around his ankles. At one point, he was sure he saw Doris's face in the patterns, her smile stretching unnaturally wide. When Mark finally jolted awake, his heart was racing, and his t-shirt was damp with sweat. The room was pitch black, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The unfamiliar shadows of hotel furniture loomed in the darkness, taking on sinister shapes in his sleep-addled mind. Fumbling for his phone on the nightstand, he squinted at the too bright screen. 3:17 a.m. Great, he thought. Less than 3 hours before he had to be up. Groaning, Mark swung his legs over the side of the bed. He needed to use the bathroom and maybe splash some cold water on his face to shake off the lingering unease from his dreams. His bare feet hit the carpet, and he recoiled slightly. Was it damp? No, just cold, he assured himself. As he flicked on the bathroom light, something felt off. The layout was wrong. The sink, which he distinctly remembered being on the left, was now on the right. And wasn't the shower curtain a different color? He could have sworn it was beige earlier, but now it looked more like a pale blue. Mark's reflection in the mirror seemed to lag just a second behind his movements, a subtle distortion that made his skin crawl. Mark shook his head, chalking it up to his groggy state and the disorienting effect of staying in an unfamiliar place. He quickly used the facilities and washed his hands, avoiding his reflection in the mirror. Something about his own face in the dim light unsettled him, reminding him too much of the hollow-eyed apparitions from his dreams. Returning to the bedroom, Mark froze. The furniture had changed. The desk was now on the opposite wall, and the TV seemed larger. Even the bedspread was different. Wasn't it a dull beige before? Now it was a deep burgundy. The dark stain on the carpet had grown larger, its edges fraying as if the fabric were being eaten away. What the hell? Mark muttered, reaching for the light switch. Nothing happened. He tried again, flicking it up and down rapidly. Still nothing. A power outage, maybe? But no, the alarm clock on the nightstand still glowed, its red numbers a steady 3:17 a.m. Heart pounding, Mark grabbed his phone and used its flashlight to illuminate the room. His suitcase was gone. So were his clothes, which he'd left draped over a chair. The flash drive with his presentation was nowhere to be seen. Mark's breath came in short, panicked gasps as he fumbled with the door handle. It swung open easily, and he stumbled into the hallway, the cold carpet shocking his bare feet. The corridor stretched out before him, identical to the one he'd walked down earlier, or was it? The carpet pattern seemed even more dizzying now, the swirls almost moving beneath his feet. The wallpaper, which he remembered as being a neutral beige, now sported a repeating pattern of what looked disturbingly like faces in agony. Mark glanced at the room number on the door he'd just exited. 237. He blinked hard, sure he must be seeing things. But no, it was definitely 237. He looked at the door across the hall. Also 237. The next door down? 237 again. Determined to find answers, Mark strode down the hallway towards where he thought the elevator should be. As he passed other rooms, he noticed something strange. All the numbers were 237. Every single door bore the same brass numbers, slightly tarnished but unmistakable. The elevator, when it arrived, was empty. The interior looked different too, older, with a tarnished brass railing and flickering fluorescent light. Mark jabbed the button for the lobby, his finger shaking. The descent seemed to take forever, the floor indicator slowly ticking down. 2, 1, G, B. Wait, B? Mark didn't remember seeing a basement level on the directory in the lobby. The numbers continued. B2, B3, B4. Mark's stomach lurched. This wasn't possible. How deep did this hotel go? The numbers kept descending. B10, B20, B50. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the elevator stopped. The door slid open with a metallic groan, revealing a dimly lit corridor. The air was colder here, and it smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something metallic, like blood. Mark hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stay inside the elevator, to hit the lobby button again and never look back. But a strange compulsion drew him forward, as if invisible hands were guiding him. Stepping out of the elevator, Mark's breath misted in the cold air. The walls here were different, not the faded floral wallpaper from above, but rough, damp stone. The carpet was gone, replaced by cracked tiles, some of which were missing, revealing dark, damp earth beneath. The dim light came from bare bulbs hanging from frayed wires, casting long, unsettling shadows that seemed to move just out of the corner of his eye. The hallway stretched on into darkness, and though every rational part of Mark's mind told him to turn back, to run, he found himself moving forward. The floor beneath his feet seemed to pull slightly, as if alive. His footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes sounding far away, other times unnervingly close. The corridor was narrow, and the further he walked, the tighter it seemed to become, the walls pressing in on him until he felt like he could barely breathe. Finally, he reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was old, made of heavy wood, and reinforced with thick iron bands. There was no number on it, just a small, rusted plaque with illegible writing. Mark's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. The metal was cold, sending a shock through his fingertips as he turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a large, cavernous room lit by a single, flickering light bulb hanging from a high ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty, tattered books and strange artifacts, masks, old photographs, and what looked like jars filled with murky liquid. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. Mark's reflection stared back at him, but something was wrong. His eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to pull at the edges of his sanity. As he stepped closer to the mirror, drawn to it despite the terror gnawing at his gut, the air around him grew colder. He could see his breath, and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, converging around the edges of the mirror. He reached out, fingers brushing the cold glass, and as he did, his reflection moved independently. It smiled at him, a wide, unnatural grin that spread too far, revealing too many teeth. Mark yanked his hand back, heart pounding, but it was too late. The mirror rippled like water, and his reflection stepped out, solidifying into a figure identical to him, but twisted. Its eyes were still empty voids, and its smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face almost in two. The creature took a step forward, and Mark stumbled back, tripping over a loose tile and landing hard on the cold floor. The doppelganger loomed over him, its grin growing wider still. It crouched down, its face inches from Mark's, and whispered in a voice that wasn't quite human, "You shouldn't have come here, Mark." Mark tried to scream, but no sound came out. The creature reached out, its cold fingers brushing his cheek, and everything went black. When Mark came to, he was lying on the floor of the hotel room, drenched in sweat. The bed was back where it should be, the desk in its original position. The suitcase was next to the luggage rack, just as he'd left it, and the flash drive sat on the nightstand. The only sign that anything had happened was the time on his phone, 3:17 a.m., exactly as it had been before. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps as he scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over the nightstand in his haste. His heart pounded in his chest, and his skin felt clammy and cold. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it all, a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and exhaustion. But as he looked around the room, something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. In the corner of the mirror, almost hidden in the shadows, was a dark smudge, a handprint smeared across the glass. He stared at it, his pulse quickening, trying to convince himself it was just a trick of the light. Then, the handprint twitched. The fingers, smudged and indistinct, slowly began to curl inward, as if someone or something on the other side of the mirror was beckoning him back. Mark's stomach turned as he forced himself to look away, every instinct screaming at him to leave the room, to get out of the hotel as fast as he could. But as he reached for his suitcase, a cold, unsettling thought crept into his mind, one he couldn't shake. Had he really escaped room 237, or had the room simply followed him? The night shift. Emma Sanders suppressed a yawn as she pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Starlight Hotel. The grandiose lobby, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, stood in stark contrast to the fatigue etched on her face. It was 11:45 p.m., and her first night shift as the new front desk clerk was about to begin. "You must be Emma," a voice called out. A middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes approached, her sensible shoes clicking against the polished floor. "I'm Margaret. I'll be showing you the ropes tonight." Emma nodded, forcing a smile. "Nice to meet you, Margaret. I appreciate the help." "First time working nights?" Margaret asked, leading Emma behind the grand mahogany desk. "Is it that obvious?" Emma chuckled nervously. Margaret patted her arm. "Don't worry, dear. You'll get used to it. Night shift's not so bad once you adjust. Just remember, things can get a bit different after dark." Before Emma could ask what she meant, Margaret launched into a tour of the systems, the booking software, key card machine, and phone switchboard. It was a lot to take in, but Emma was determined to prove herself. This job was her ticket out of her parents' house and into her own apartment. As the clock struck midnight, Margaret gathered her things. "Well, that's me done for the night. You should be fine. It's usually quiet this time of year. If you need anything, Jerry the night security guard does rounds every hour. Good luck." And with that, Emma was alone. The first hour passed uneventfully. Emma familiarized herself with the computer system, only jumping slightly when the ancient coffee maker in the back office gurgled to life at 1 a.m. At 1:30 a.m., the front doors swung open. A man in a crisp business suit strode in, his polished shoes echoing in the empty lobby. Emma straightened up, ready to put her training into practice. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Starlight Hotel. How may I assist you?" The man approached the desk, his movements oddly stiff. When he spoke, his voice was monotone, almost robotic. "Room. One night." Emma blinked, thrown off by his abruptness. "Certainly, sir. May I have your name for the reservation?" "Smith. John Smith." "Of course it is," Emma thought, fighting the urge to roll her eyes. She typed the information into the system. "And will you be needing one bed or two?" The man stared at her blankly for a moment before responding. "One, single occupancy." "All right, Mr. Smith. I have you in room 412. That'll be $129 for the night. How would you like to pay?" The man reached into his pocket and produced a wad of cash, counting out exact change. Emma found this odd. Most business travelers used credit cards, but she didn't comment. She handed over the key card, reciting the rehearsed spiel about breakfast hours and checkout time. Mr. Smith took the key without a word and headed for the elevators. As he waited, he stood unnaturally still, not even swaying slightly as most people do. Emma watched him, a sense of unease growing in her stomach. Just as the elevator arrived, Mr. Smith turned and looked directly at Emma. For a split second, she could have sworn his eyes glowed in the dim light of the lobby. Then the doors closed, and he was gone. Emma shook her head. Lack of sleep was clearly getting to her. The next few hours passed slowly. Emma alternated between checking her phone, against policy, but who would know, and doodling on the back of old memos. At 3 a.m., she decided to make another pot of coffee. As she waited for the coffee to brew, movement on one of the security monitors caught her eye. A figure was walking down the fourth-floor hallway. Emma leaned in for a closer look. It was Mr. Smith, but something was off. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical. And was he gliding? Emma rubbed her eyes. When she looked again, the hallway was empty. Unsettled, she poured her coffee with shaking hands. Get it together, Sanders, she chided herself. You're letting your imagination run wild. At 3:30 a.m., the phone rang, startling Emma so badly she nearly spilled her coffee. Starlight Hotel, this is Emma speaking. How may I assist you? There was no response, just a strange, rhythmic clicking sound. Hello? Emma tried again. Is anyone there? The clicking grew louder, faster. Then, abruptly, it stopped. A voice spoke, but it wasn't human. It sounded like multiple voices layered on top of each other, speaking in unison. We're here. The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone, her heart racing. What the hell was that? She glanced at the security monitors again. All seemed quiet, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach had grown into full-blown anxiety. At 4 a.m., Jerry the security guard appeared, right on schedule. Emma had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. Everything okay, miss? Jerry asked, noting her pale face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Emma forced a laugh. No, just tired, I guess. First night and all. Jerry nodded sympathetically. Night shift's not for everyone. Stick with it, though. It gets easier. As Jerry turned to continue his rounds, Emma blurted out, Have you noticed anything strange about the guest in 412? Jerry froze. Slowly, he turned back to face her. For 12, you say? Emma nodded. Yeah, he checked in around 1:30. Odd guy. Called himself John Smith. Jerry's face had gone ashen. Miss, room 412 has been out of commission for weeks. Plumbing issues. Emma felt her blood run cold. But I checked him in myself. I have it right here in the system. She turned the monitor towards Jerry, but where Mr. Smith's reservation had been, there was now just a blank space. Jerry placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. Listen to me carefully. Go into the back office and lock the door. Don't come out until dawn, no matter what you hear. Understand? But. No buts. Go. Now. The urgency in Jerry's voice spurred Emma into action. She hurried into the back office, locking the door behind her. Through the small window, she watched as Jerry pulled out a walkie-talkie. Margaret? It's happening again. Room 412. Send the team. Emma's mind raced. What team? What was happening? She pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear more, but Jerry had already disappeared down the hallway towards the elevators. For the next hour, Emma huddled in the office, jumping at every sound. She heard muffled voices, hurried footsteps, and once, a sound like static electricity crackling through the air. At precisely 5:47 a.m., as the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the windows, there was a knock at the office door. "Emma? You can come out now. It's over." It was Margaret's voice, but Emma hesitated. "How do I know it's really you?" A sigh. "Because I told you things get different after dark, and you didn't listen." Emma unlocked the door with trembling hands. Margaret stood there, looking exhausted but relieved. Behind her, Emma could see a group of people in dark suits conferring quietly by the elevators. What was that? Who are they?" Emma asked. Margaret shook her head. "It's better if you don't know the details. Let's just say we sometimes get guests who aren't quite human. We have protocols in place to deal with them." Emma's mind whirled. "So, Mr. Smith." "Was not Mr. Smith," Margaret finished. "And he wasn't here for a good night's sleep." One of the suited individuals approached. "Ms. Sanders? I'm Agent Chen. I'm afraid I'll need you to sign some non-disclosure agreements." Emma looked from Agent Chen to Margaret, realization dawning. "This isn't just a hotel, is it?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Oh, it is. But it's also so much more. The question is, can you handle that?" Emma thought about her dreary hometown, her parents' disappointed faces when she dropped out of college. She thought about the strange phone call, the unsettling security footage. She thought about the inexplicable fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. "Where do I sign?" she asked. Agent Chen produced a tablet. "Right here. Welcome to the real night shift, Miss Sanders." As Emma signed her name, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed irrevocably. The Starlight Hotel had many secrets, and she was now keeper of them all. The sun rose fully, bathing the lobby in warm light. The suited individuals disappeared as quietly as they had come. Margaret and Jerry went about resetting the lobby as if nothing had happened. At 6 a.m., Emma's replacement arrived. Lisa, the morning shift receptionist, looked annoyingly chipper. "How was your first night?" she asked brightly. Emma glanced at Margaret, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Oh, Emma replied with a forced smile. "Just another quiet night at the Starlight." As Emma left the hotel, the morning sun warm on her face, she couldn't help but look back. The Starlight Hotel stood tall and imposing, its windows glinting in the early light. To the rest of the world, it was just another luxury hotel. But Emma now knew better. She pulled out her phone and called her parents. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, the night shift went fine. Listen, I think I'm going to stick with this job for a while. It's interesting." As she hung up and walked towards the bus stop, Emma felt a mix of fear and excitement. Tonight, she would return to the Starlight Hotel. And who knew what otherworldly guests might check in? The night shift had only just begun. The last guest. Sarah Winters pulled her beaten-up Subaru into the nearly empty parking lot of the Mountain Vista Lodge. Snowflakes swirled in her headlights, adding to the already impressive blanket of white covering the ground. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly, looking as tired as Sarah felt after her long drive. As she killed the engine, Sarah checked her phone one last time. No signal. Perfect. That's exactly what she wanted. To be unreachable, to disappear for a while. The nasty breakup, the stress of her job, the suffocating expectations of her family, she needed to escape it all, if only for a weekend. Grabbing her duffel bag from the back seat, Sarah made her way to the lodge's entrance. The building was an imposing structure of dark wood and stone, its peaked roof disappearing into the snowy night sky. It looked like something out of a postcard or a horror movie, Sarah thought with a wry smile. A blast of warm air greeted her as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The lobby was cozy, all crackling fireplace and overstuffed armchairs. Mounted deer heads and old skiing photos adorned the walls. At the far end, A bored-looking man in his 50s stood behind the check-in desk. "Evening," Sarah said, approaching the desk. "I have a reservation for Winters." The man, his name tag read, Bill, tapped at an ancient computer. Yes. Sarah Winters. 3 nights, single room." "That's right." Bill's bushy eyebrows furrowed as he studied the screen. "You do know it's the off-season, right? Not much happening up here this time of year." Sarah nodded. "That's kind of the point. I'm looking for some peace and quiet." "Well, you'll certainly get that," Bill chuckled. "You're our only guest at the moment." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the snow outside. The only guest? In this whole place? Bill shrugged. "It's a big lodge, but business is slow until the ski season kicks off. Just you and the staff, that's me, the cook, and a couple of maintenance guys." Sarah hesitated. The idea of being alone had been appealing, but this felt different. Isolated. Bill must have sensed her unease. "Don't worry, miss. We're in a tight ship here. You'll be safe as houses. And if you need anything, just dial 0 on your room phone." After a moment, Sarah nodded. "All right. Thank you." Bill handed her an actual key, no electronic key cards here, attached to a heavy wooden fob with the number 237 carved into it. "Up the stairs, end of the hall on your left. Breakfast is served from 7 to 10 in the dining room. Have a pleasant stay, Miss Winters." Sarah murmured her thanks and headed for the stairs. As she climbed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced back, but Bill had already disappeared into a back room. Room 237 was spacious, if a bit dated. Floral wallpaper, a 4-poster bed, and heavy curtains that Sarah immediately drew closed. She unpacked quickly, then stood by the window, peering out at the swirling snow. The parking lot was visible from here. Her Subaru sat alone, already acquiring a fresh coat of white. Shaking off her unease, Sarah decided to explore the lodge. The hallways were long and winding, lined with more photos of smiling skiers and stern-faced men who she assumed were the original owners. The carpet, a deep red with an intricate pattern, muffled her footsteps. She found a small library filled with dusty books, a game room with a pool table and dartboard, and a closed door marked "Staff Only." Eventually, she made her way back to the lobby. Bill was nowhere to be seen, but the fire still crackled merrily in the hearth. Sarah settled into one of the armchairs, pulling out the book she'd brought. The warmth of the fire and the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner soon lulled her into a sense of peace. This was what she'd come for: quiet, solitude, a chance to reset. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, she was jolted awake by a loud thud. Sarah sat up, disoriented. The fire had died down to embers, and the lobby was cast in deep shadows. The grandfather clock showed it was just past midnight. "Hello," she called out. "Mr. Bill?" No answer. Sarah stood, stretching out the kinks in her neck. As she did, she noticed something odd. The front door of the lodge was wide open, snow swirling in and accumulating on the welcome mat. Heart pounding, Sarah approached the door. The wind howled outside, driving icy pellets of snow into her face. She peered out into the darkness, but could see nothing beyond the small circle of light from the lobby. "Is anyone there?" she called, her voice swallowed by the wind. Again, no answer. Fighting against the wind, Sarah managed to force the door closed. She turned the lock, an old-fashioned deadbolt that slid into place with a reassuring thunk. As she turned back to the lobby, movement caught her eye. A dark figure darted across the far end of the room, disappearing down a hallway. "Hey!" Sarah shouted, her voice shrill with fear. "Who's there?" She hurried to the hallway, but it was empty. Doors lined both sides, conference rooms, she assumed, or maybe offices. All closed. "Mr. Bill?" She tried again. "Is that you?" The only response was the moan of the wind outside and the soft tick-tock of the grandfather clock. Sarah's mind raced. Had someone come in while she was asleep? But her car was the only one in the parking lot. And surely Bill would have woken her if another guest had arrived. Unless... Sarah shook her head, trying to dislodge the thought. No. She was letting her imagination run wild. There was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe one of the maintenance guys was working late. Or maybe she had simply dreamed the whole thing. Still, as she made her way back to her room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The photos on the wall seemed to follow her with their eyes. The pattern in the carpet seemed to shift and writhe beneath her feet. Back in room 237, Sarah double-checked the lock on her door. For good measure, she wedged a chair under the handle. Then she climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with strange dreams. Sarah found herself wandering the halls of the lodge, but they seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in impossible ways. Every time she thought she'd found her way back to the lobby, she'd open a door and find herself in yet another identical hallway. And always, just at the edge of her vision, a dark figure lurked. Never clear enough to make out, but unmistakably there. Watching. Waiting. Sarah jolted awake, her heart pounding. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains. For a moment, she lay still, trying to shake off the remnants of her nightmare. A glance at her phone showed it was just past 7 a.m. Still no signal. With a sigh, Sarah dragged herself out of bed and into the shower. The hot water helped clear her head, and by the time she was dressed, she had almost convinced herself that the events of the previous night were just a product of stress and an overactive imagination. The hallway was quiet as Sarah made her way down to the dining room. She half expected to run into other guests, despite what Bill had told her. But the lodge remained eerily silent. The dining room was empty when she arrived. A buffet was set up along one wall, steam rising from covered chafing dishes. But there was no sign of the cook or any other staff. "Hello?" Sarah called out. "Is anyone here?" Silence. Uneasily, Sarah helped herself to some eggs and toast. She had just sat down to eat when she heard it, footsteps, coming from the hallway. Heavy, deliberate steps that stopped just outside the dining room door. Sarah held her breath, waiting for someone to enter. But the door remained closed. After a moment, the footsteps resumed, moving away down the hall. Without thinking, Sarah rose and hurried to the door. She yanked it open, half expecting to see Bill or one of the maintenance men. The hallway was empty. But there, on the carpet, was a set of wet footprints. Too big to be her own, they led from the dining room door to nowhere. Halfway down the hall, they simply stopped, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them had simply vanished into thin air. Sarah's appetite vanished. She hurried back to her room, her mind whirling. This wasn't right. None of this was right. She had to get out of here. In her room, Sarah threw her things haphazardly into her duffel bag. She'd go to the front desk, tell Bill she was cutting her stay short. She'd drive back down the mountain, find a motel in the nearest town. Somewhere with other people, with cell phone reception. Somewhere normal. But when Sarah reached the lobby, Bill wasn't there. The front desk was deserted. "Mr. Bill," she called out. "Hello? Is anyone here? I need to check out." No answer. Fighting down panic, Sarah went behind the desk. The ancient computer was off. She tried turning it on, but nothing happened. The phone was dead too. A movement in her peripheral vision made Sarah whirl around. There, at the far end of the lobby, was the dark figure she'd seen the night before. This time, she got a better look. It was tall, inhumanly so, its form seeming to shift and waver like smoke. And it was coming towards her. Sarah ran, out the front door, into the swirling snow. The wind howled, driving icy shards into her face, but she didn't slow down. She fumbled with her car keys, her fingers numb with cold and fear. Finally, the key slid home. Sarah wrenched the door open and threw herself inside, slamming it shut behind her. She jammed the key into the ignition, silently pleading with the old Subaru to start. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. Sarah threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the snow. As she turned to back up, her heart stopped. There, in her rearview mirror, was the figure. It stood directly behind her car, its form billowing in the wind. And though it had no discernible face, Sarah knew it was looking right at her. With a scream, Sarah floored the accelerator. The Subaru fishtailed wildly, then found purchase. She rocketed out of the parking lot, spraying snow in her wake. As Mountain Vista Lodge disappeared in her rearview mirror, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. She was safe. She'd escaped. It was over. Then her eyes flicked to the passenger seat. There, carved into the worn fabric, was a crude message. 3 words that made Sarah's blood run cold. Never the last. Sarah's scream was lost in the howling wind as she sped down the mountain, the dark figure now seated silently beside her. Back at the lodge, Bill emerged from the back office, frowning. He could have sworn he'd heard a car, but that was impossible. There were no guests scheduled for weeks. He shrugged and went back to his crossword puzzle. Just another quiet day at Mountain Vista Lodge. Or was it?